I'm Nana, and I had no idea that I would be narrating this tale. Being the only child of Robert and Elizabeth Collins, I was raised in an affluent environment. My father started his business empire from nothing and was a self-made man. He constantly pushed me to be my best self and was firm yet loving. On the other hand, my mother glided through high society circles with effortless elegance and polish. Our family occupied a large mansion outside of the municipal limits. I had the best education, the most expensive clothes, and the most exotic holidays a girl could ask for. But there was always a part of me that felt hollow, even with all the material comforts. Let's introduce Mark Johnson. When I finally got to meet him in my senior year of college, it was like a lightning strike. He was attractive, engaging, and seemed to have a unique understanding of me. I felt really alive for the first time in my life when we started dating. The only issue was that my folks detested him. One night over dinner, my mother said to Nana, "Darling, don't you think Mark is attracted to you because of our money as well as your inner qualities?" With a severe grimace on his face, my father added, "He has no ambition or prospects. You can't expect to live the life you're used to from him." I don't care about any of that. I pushed away from the table and yelled, "Both he and I are in love. Isn't that what really counts?" When Mark made his proposal, everything erupted. There was no fancy restaurant or extravagant staging. It was just a plain event. We were strolling alone in the park, where we went on our first date. He dropped down on one knee, presented me with a tiny ring, and proposed marriage. Without hesitation, I answered sure. I told my folks, and everything went crazy. My father yelled, "You're no longer welcome in this house if you marry him." With tears flowing down my cheeks, I pleaded, "Daddy, please, can't you just be happy for me?" But he refused to move. With a look of disappointment on her face, my mother stood by his side in silence. That evening, my heart shattered, but my determination unwavering, I departed. Mark and I moved into his modest flat together, which he shared with a flatmate. I was determined to make it work, even though it was a far cry from the luxury I was used to. The weeks before the wedding passed quickly, due to stress and preparation. I never stopped hoping my parents would see how much I valued their presence and change. But when the big day drew nearer, it became obvious that they had no intention of changing their minds. As I walked down the aisle, I scanned the faces of our guests, still holding out hope that I'd see my parents. But they weren't there. For a moment, sadness threatened to overwhelm me. Then I saw Mark standing at the altar, looking at me like I was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. In that moment, everything else faded away. My parents' absence, the modest surroundings, the uncertain future. None of it mattered. I was marrying the man I loved, and that was enough. After the wedding, Mark and I moved into the luxury apartment in the city center that my beloved grandfather had left me. It was a stark contrast to Mark's old place, spacious with high ceilings and a view of the city skyline. I spent days decorating it, trying to make it feel like our home. As the days turned into weeks and then months, we settled into married life. Mark threw himself into his work at a local marketing firm, often coming home late, but always with a smile and a kiss for me. I busied myself with setting up our home and volunteering at a local animal shelter. About a year and a half after our wedding, our lives changed forever. I still remember the day I found out I was pregnant. My hands were shaking as I held the positive test, a mix of excitement and terror coursing through me. When I told Mark, his face lit up like a Christmas tree. "We're going to be parents," he exclaimed, picking me up and spinning me around. "Nina, this is amazing." When our son Jacob was born, I was overwhelmed with love. He was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and a shock of dark hair just like his father's. Through the haze of exhaustion and joy, I snapped a picture of him and sent it to my parents. I waited for a response, a call, a text, anything. But there was nothing but silence. "They'll come around," Mark assured me, seeing the hurt in my eyes. How could they resist this little guy? I tried to push the disappointment aside and focus on our new family. A few months after Jacob was born, I decided it was time for me to get back to work. I found a part-time position as a manager at a local boutique. Balancing work, a newborn, and keeping the house in order was a challenge, but I was determined to make it work. I'd wake up early to feed Jacob, drop him off at daycare, work my shift, pick him up, make dinner, clean the house, and collapse into bed, only to do it all over again the next day. But as Jacob neared his first birthday, I started to notice changes in Mark. He became more distant, often coming home even later than before. When he was home, he seemed distracted, always on his phone. "Everything okay at work?" I asked one night as we got ready for bed. "Yeah, just busy," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "Big project coming up." As I drifted off to sleep that night, Jacob's soft breathing coming through the baby monitor, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But I pushed it aside. We were happy, weren't we? We had a beautiful son, a lovely home, good jobs. What more could I want? The changes in Mark became more pronounced as time went on. One evening, as I was putting Jacob to bed, Mark cornered me in the nursery. "Nina, we need to talk," he said, his tone unusually serious. "I think you should quit your job." I blinked, sure I had misheard him. "Quit my job? Why?" "Look around," he gestured vaguely. "The house is a mess. Jacob needs more attention. I think it would be better if you focused on being a full-time mom and housewife." I felt like I'd been slapped, but I love my job, and I thought we were managing just fine. Mark's face hardened. "Well, we're not. I'm the man of this house, and I'm telling you it's time to quit." We argued late into the night, but in the end I gave in. I told myself it was for the good of our family, that Mark was just stressed from work. The next day, with a heavy heart, I handed in my resignation. At first, I threw myself into my new role with gusto. I deep-cleaned the apartment, tried new recipes, and spent hours playing with Jacob. But as the days wore on, I found myself missing the structure and satisfaction of my job. Meanwhile, Mark's behavior continued to change. He started coming home later and later, often smelling of alcohol. Our bank account, which I had access to, showed mysterious withdrawals. One night, as I was folding laundry, I confronted him. "Mark, where is all our money going? We're barely making ends meet." He exploded. "Maybe if you knew how to budget properly, we wouldn't have this problem." I recoiled, shocked at his outburst. This wasn't the man I married. Things only got worse from there. Mark began criticizing everything I did. The house was never clean enough, dinner was never good enough, and I wasn't attentive enough to Jacob. The final straw came when Jacob got sick with a nasty flu. He was running a high fever and crying constantly. I was at my wit's end, having been up for 2 nights straight. "Mark, please," I begged, "can you take a day off work to help me with Jacob? I'm exhausted." He looked at me like I was crazy. "Take a day off? Are you kidding? Some of us actually have to work for a living, Nana." The next day, he came home with a suitcase. "I'm going to a hotel for a few days," he announced. "I need to rest after work, not listen to a screaming kid." I was stunned. "You're leaving us now." He shrugged, already heading for the door. "Taking care of Jacob is your job, not mine. Call me when he's better." As the door slammed behind him, I sank to the floor, Jacob wailing in my arms. What had happened to us? to the man who had once looked at me like I hung the moon. In that moment, I missed my parents more than ever. I wanted to call them, to hear my mother's soothing voice, to feel my father's protective embrace. But pride and shame held me back. How could I admit that they had been right all along? As I rocked Jacob, trying to soothe both his cries and my own, I couldn't help but think about the words my father had said on the day I told them about my engagement. "He's not the man you think he is." Nana. The days following Mark's departure to the hotel were a blur of sleepless nights and exhausting days. Jacob's fever finally broke, and as his health improved, I found myself with more time to think, perhaps too much time. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong in my marriage. The man who returned from the hotel was not the Mark I had fallen in love with. He was distant, irritable, and seemed to resent both Jacob and me. One evening, about a week after he'd returned, Mark came home earlier than usual. His face was serious, and he was clutching some papers. "Nana, we need to talk about insurance," he said, sitting down at the kitchen table. "I've taken out a life insurance policy on myself for $1 million. I think you should do the same." The amount made my head spin. $1 million, Mark. That seems excessive. And why do I need such a large policy? I don't even work outside the home anymore. His eyes hardened. "It's for Jacob's future in case anything happens to either of us. Don't you want to make sure he's taken care of?" Put that way, I couldn't argue. "I suppose you're right," I said slowly. "If you think it's best." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "I'll set up the appointment with the insurance agent." Over the next few days, I noticed Mark's behavior becoming even stranger. He was constantly on his phone, texting at all hours. Whenever it rang, he'd leave the room to answer, often locking himself in our home office. One morning, after Mark left for work, I made a decision. I couldn't live with this uncertainty anymore. I needed answers. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd found online. "Hawkeye Private Investigations, how can I help you?" A gruff voice answered. I took a deep breath. I need someone to follow my husband. I think he might be. I couldn't bring myself to say the words, but the investigator seemed to understand. "I see, ma'am. Why don't you come into our office, and we can discuss the details." That afternoon, while Jacob was napping, I met with the investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Linda. I told her everything. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the drastic personality change. Linda listened intently, taking notes. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Mrs. Johnson. I'll have my best guy on it." As I left her office, I felt a mix of relief and dread. Part of me hoped this was all a misunderstanding, that there was a reasonable explanation for Mark's behavior. But a larger part knew that whatever the investigator uncovered was likely to change my life forever. 3 weeks after hiring the private investigator, I received the call I had been both dreading and anticipating. "Mrs. Johnson, we have the report ready." Linda's voice came through the phone. "You might want to sit down for this." With trembling hands, I sank into a chair, my heart pounding. "I'm ready. Tell me everything." As Linda spoke, I felt my world crumbling around me. Mark, my husband, the father of my child, had been unfaithful. He had a mistress. The evidence was irrefutable. Photographs, text messages, hotel receipts. It was all there in black and white. I waited until Mark left for work the next morning before springing into action. With shaking hands, I packed a bag for myself and Jacob, throwing in only the essentials: clothes, diapers, and a few of Jacob's favorite toys. I couldn't bear to look at the photos on the walls, the happy memories that now felt like lies. "We're going to see Grandma and Grandpa." I said to Jacob as I put him in the stroller. He giggled, oblivious to the turmoil around him. I decided to take the metro to my parents' house. It would be faster than driving through rush hour traffic. As I approached the station, my mind was racing, planning our next steps. That's when it happened. I was crossing the street, pushing Jacob in his stroller, when suddenly there was a screech of tires. I turned my head and saw a car hurtling towards us. In a split second, I pushed the stroller out of the way, then pain, blinding, all-consuming pain, and then darkness. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I finally opened my eyes, I was in a hospital room. The steady beep of machines filled the air, and there, sitting by my bed, looking haggard and worried, was Mark. "Jacob," I croaked, my throat dry. "Where's Jacob?" Mark leaned forward, taking my hand. "He's fine, Nana. He's with Lisa, your best friend." Not a scratch on him. Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by a wave of pain. I looked down at my legs, both encased in casts. "You have multiple fractures in both legs," Mark explained gently. "The doctors say it'll take about a year for you to fully recover. You'll need to use a wheelchair for a while." I closed my eyes, trying to process this information. A year, a wheelchair. Then, like a bolt of lightning, I remembered why I had been at that metro station in the first place. "I know about her," I blurted out, my eyes snapping open to gauge Mark's reaction. "Your mistress. I know everything." Mark's face paled for a moment. He looked like he might deny it. Then his shoulders slumped. "Nana, it wasn't serious. It was a stupid mistake," he stammered. "When I got the call about your accident, I realized how close I came to losing you." "I can't lose you, Nana. Please, can we start over? Give me another chance. I'll do better. I promise." I looked at him. This man I had loved for so long seemed so sincere, so remorseful. And I was so tired, so overwhelmed by everything that had happened. "Okay," I heard myself say. "We can try." The day I was discharged from the hospital was surreal. Mark arrived with a bouquet of my favorite flowers, pink peonies. His smile seemed genuine, his eyes filled with concern and love. As he wheeled me out of the hospital, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe we could make this work after all. The first 2 weeks at home were surprisingly nice. Mark was attentive, caring, almost doting. He helped me with everything from getting dressed to bathing. He'd carry me to the bathroom in his arms, careful not to jar my injured legs. It reminded me of our early days together, when every touch felt electric. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Mark turned to me with a glint in his eye. "Nana, I've been thinking," he said, taking my hand. "We should get away for a weekend, just the two of us, to celebrate your recovery and, well, us." My heart skipped a beat. "Really? Where?" "I found this cozy little house in the mountains, overlooking a beautiful canyon. What do you say?" I couldn't help but smile. "That sounds wonderful, but what about Jacob? And I'm in a wheelchair. I'm sure Lisa wouldn't mind watching him for a couple of days." "About the wheelchair, if anything, I'll carry you in my arms. Come on, it'll be good for us." I agreed, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This could be exactly what we needed to reconnect. The drive to the mountains was peaceful. As we wound our way up the narrow road, I felt the tension of the past months slowly melting away. The house, when we arrived, was everything Mark had promised. Cozy, secluded, with breathtaking views of the canyon. "I'm going to explore a bit," Mark said after we'd settled in. "Why don't you rest?" I nodded, watching him disappear down a trail. Left alone, I decided to check my emails. I hadn't had a chance to do so since the accident. My phone was nowhere to be found, so I wheeled myself over to Mark's laptop. As I opened the browser, an email notification popped up. It was from an unfamiliar address, but the subject line made my blood run cold. Urgent, new information about your case. With trembling hands, I clicked on it. The message was from Linda, the private investigator I'd hired weeks ago. My heart pounded as I read. Mrs. Johnson, I've been trying to reach you. Your number is out of service. I've uncovered disturbing new information. You're in danger. Your husband was involved in your accident. He's trying to get rid of you for the insurance money and your apartment. His mistress was driving the car that hit you. I've attached evidence, photos, videos, texts. Please contact me immediately. I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. There was Mark, plotting with his mistress. There were bank statements showing large withdrawals. There was a grainy video of a woman who looked remarkably like Mark's assistant behind the wheel of a car moments before impact. Just as I closed the laptop, Mark walked in. I tried to compose myself, but my heart was racing. "Everything okay, Nina?" he asked, his voice deceptively casual. I forced a smile. "Yeah, I can't find my phone." "Have you seen it?" A cold smile played on Mark's lips. "Oh, that." It broke down suddenly. Must have been damaged in the accident. A chill ran down my spine. I needed to contact someone, anyone, but how? "Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "could I borrow your phone? I want to check on Jacob, see how he's doing with Lisa." He hesitated for a moment, then handed me his phone. "Sure, go ahead. I'll just be right here." My hands trembled as I took the phone. Mark hovered nearby, watching. I knew I couldn't call the police, or even Lisa. Then a memory flashed in my mind, a conversation with my father years ago. "If you're ever in trouble and can't speak freely, ask about Buddy the bear. I'll know you need help." Praying my father hadn't changed his number, I dialed. When he answered, I put on my brightest voice. "Hey Lisa, how's everything going? How's Buddy the bear doing?" There was a pause, and I held my breath. Then my father's voice came through, deliberately high-pitched to sound feminine. "Oh, you know, same old, same old. How are you?" Relief washed over me. He understood. "Good. Oh, it's lovely up here," I gushed, aware of Mark's eyes on me. "We're at this beautiful cabin, 1247 Pine Ridge Road. The view of Evergreen Canyon is just stunning." "I see," my father said carefully. "When do you think you'll be back?" "Oh, I dream of seeing you right now. This very second," I said emphatically. "I miss you guys already." After exchanging a few more pleasantries, I hung up. Mark seemed satisfied, not suspecting anything. As evening approached, Mark suggested a walk. "The sunset over the canyon is beautiful. We shouldn't miss it." Fear gripped me, but I knew I had no choice. "That sounds nice," I managed to say. Mark wheeled me out onto a narrow path that wound along the edge of the canyon. The view was breathtaking. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, the canyon stretching endlessly before us. But all I could think about was the sheer drop just feet away. As Mark pushed my wheelchair, chatting about the scenery as if everything was normal, I closed my eyes and prayed. "Please, Dad," I thought desperately. "Please find me in time." The path curved one last time, and suddenly we were at the edge of the cliff. Mark turned my chair around, and our eyes met. The loving facade he'd maintained crumbled away, revealing a stranger with eyes full of anger and hatred. "You know, Nana," he said, his voice cold and detached, "I'm really sorry it had to come to this. The car accident was supposed to take care of everything, but you just had to survive, didn't you?" My blood ran cold as the full truth of my situation hit me. "Mark, please," I whispered. "Don't do this." He laughed mirthlessly. Do you have any idea how perfect this is? A tragic accident at a scenic overlook. Your wheelchair rolls off the edge when the brakes fail. I'll be the grieving widower, inherit your apartment, and cash in on that $1 million insurance policy. It's foolproof. As he spoke, he inched my wheelchair closer to the edge. I closed my eyes, silently praying for a miracle. Suddenly, I heard shouts and running footsteps. My eyes flew open to see my father sprinting down the path, followed closely by several police officers. Nana, my father yelled, reaching us just as Mark was about to push me over. He grabbed the handles of my wheelchair, yanking me back from the brink. Everything happened in a blur. The police tackled Mark to the ground, reading him his rights as they handcuffed him. I sat there trembling as the realization of what had nearly transpired overcame me. My dad knelt next to my wheelchair and hugged me tightly. I sobbed into his shoulder after breaking down. I blurted out, "I'm so sorry, Dad," in between sobbing. You were correct on him. I ought to have paid attention to you. He softly touched my hair while speaking in a really felt voice. No, my love, it's me who needs to apologize. We allowed our egos to separate us. Could you please accept our apology for not supporting you and Jacob? I nodded, too emotional to say anything. For an extended period, we remained in that state, years of hurt and miscommunication dissipating. In the ensuing weeks, everything was altered. After I filed for divorce, Mark and his lover, who had been driving the car in the first collision, were both found guilty of attempted murder due to the overwhelming evidence against them. I acquired a new flat a short distance from my parents' house and close to a decent school for Jacob after selling the one that brought back so many terrible memories. As I recovered, I moved back in with my parents. It was a year of emotional and physical recovery. In an attempt to make up for missed time, my parents showered their grandson, Jacob. I gradually regained my ability to smile, trust, and hope.